Hey YouTube, welcome back. I've got a spicy build for you today. We took this character to level 100 in about 5 streams worth of playtime, so about 8 hours apiece. It has been a super fast character, and it's totally overperformed. The reason that I wanted to play some Ravaging Aura as a Void Knight is it actually just got a bug fix recently, around patch 084F, maybe patch E, something like that. But there was some clunkiness with there's some clunkiness with Void Cleave in the past that made Ravaging Aura really, really wonky to play. And ever since that's been fixed, we picked up a two-handed sword, we started Void Cleaving, we started using Ravaging Aura as our main source of damage, and this build has totally overperformed. So I like it a lot. It's a spicy build. It's not something that I want to play in a weekend race, but it is cool and interesting, and it's something that I want to share with you. So let's go ahead and talk about it real quick. This character here, whenever you see me starting an Echo, you're going to see the basic playstyle is pretty much the same. We're just going to 1, 2, 3, 4 to get our Sigils of Hope up, and then we'll click Volatile Reversal to get our mana back. And then, as we walk through our Echo, we're just going to zoop. We're going to Void Cleave once. We're going to run for a bit while the Ravaging Aura is ticking around our character. And every time that we Void Cleave, we get this damage over time component that's around our character as well. So, as we Void Cleave, you're going to see that my mana actually goes down twice. Once for the Void Cleave and once for the Abyssal Echo that we're proccing. Let's talk about the build. It's pretty sweet. So, first things first. In order to use Void Cleave at all, you need to use a two-handed sword or a two-handed axe. Which is why we can't use a shield, we can't use a wand, we can't use a Bastion of Honor, we can't use a staff for a bunch of adaptive damage. So we're really limited in the kind of things that we can actually use for the build. Before this patch, before 084, you were even more limited because, first of all, the skill was pretty wonky, and I guess we can talk about that real quick. But second of all, you didn't have legendary items. So you had to use like a two-handed sword that had a bunch of void damage and damage over time. So in any case, you basically had to use a Dreamthorn or you had to use like an exalted void damage hollow blade sword. And those were pretty much your only two options. But now the legendary items are a thing, and now that the bug fix is in place, this build is like more fun and better than ever. So it's pretty cool. Let's talk about the bug real quick. Why is Ravaging Aura worth playing now when it was not really worth playing in the past? So in the past, you would hit something and Ravaging Aura would start ticking around your character, this purple circle here, and you had to wait until Ravaging Aura fell off before you could refresh it. So you had to hit something, wait for this thing to go, wait for this thing to wait for this thing to go, and then you could refresh it like this. So currently, it's a bit better than that. If I Void Cleave again, it resets the duration of the existing Ravaging Aura that's on my character, which means that the build is so much smoother than it used to be. So first things first, we're playing Void Cleave. Let's look at this skill here. So Void Cleave, we need to spec all the way down to the bottom right for this Ravager node. We have 3 out of 3 points. You could go 2 out of 3 points if you really wanted to, but I think the most important thing that I want to tell you about is having +2. +3 could be nice. I think I know where my last point would go, but I think you definitely want level 22 Void Cleave. However you go about doing that. You can get +1 from an Omnis Amulet. You can go +2 on your Relic. You can go +1 from a Thorn Slinger Belt, because technically this thing has the physical tag on it. There's a couple different ways that you could go about getting to 22. So why are we getting to 22? So first, we need to come all the way down here with our pathing points just to get 3 out of 3, maybe 2 out of 3 for Ravager, just to turn on the Ravaging Aura. Down here, we have 5 out of 5 for some extra flat damage and some extra AoE. And remember, because of the sub-skill, anytime that we have a node that says, like, Void Cleave deals more damage or has a larger area, those modifiers, because they don't say hit, they apply to the sub-skill as well. So, Void Cleave deals more damage, it also scales our Ravaging Aura, and then Void Cleave has a larger area, it also scales our Ravaging Aura. And that means that our Ravaging Aura is nice and big, and this is about as big as you can get this thing to be. So we have all those nodes. We also have deals more damage. So once again, this is our more damage multiplier, and then our flat damage down here. Those are important for us. If you had 23 points, or if you wanted to trim one from this Ravager cluster here, I would put a point into Void Cleave shorter cooldown, just to make it feel a little bit better as you travel around. So those are the only points we're taking here in Void Cleave. And it's why we need to have, by necessity, a two-handed sword or a two-handed axe. Real quick, most of the time when you're playing a Void Knight, you're used to having things scale with Vitality, which was an awesome change that came in 1 patch ago, 2 patches ago, I think at this point. So most of the time when you're playing something like maybe Devouring Orb, Devouring Orb has gains 2 flat spell void damage per point of vitality. So Void Cleave, it's a spell. It has the spell tag. It's damage over time. It's this thing here. But it inherits the vitality scaling of Void Cleave, which means if you're only trying to scale Ravaging Aura, vitality scaling gives you 4% increased damage per point, the same way that any old skill gains 4% increased damage per point, which is to say, it helps technically, but it's really not that great. So vitality scaling does help our single target damage, which we trigger from this node here, Resonating Cleave. So we cast Abyssal Echoes after using Void Cleave. So we're going to talk about this next. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 like this. That is Abyssal Echoes. So let's talk about it. With Abyssal Echoes, I think this is like maybe the most generic skill tree that you can come up with for it. There's really not many alternatives for building Abyssal Echoes if you want it to be a primary source of damage. This is an excellent way of getting damage out of it, with 1 point in Screaming Rifts and 2 points in Shrieking Echoes, and that's going to make it echo 5 times like I just showed you a couple seconds ago. And then we also have some flat damage here and some extra duration. So Abyssal Echoes has a lot of text on it. It's kind of weird. It's got really high damage effectiveness. So here's what's going to happen. It echoes 5 times, and it does some damage by itself. You can see, you know, it's got this 1,000, 2,000, 2,000, whatever. But the important part about this is as that damage is on the enemy, we want to make sure that in between each Abyssal Echo, we're hitting the enemy 1 time. Because this says, enemies with Abyssal Decay, I'm reading from the text in the middle there, enemies with Abyssal Decay take void damage over time for 6 seconds. If they take a hit, all the damage from Abyssal Decay is dealt to them immediately. So what we want to do is have Abyssal Echoes, put Abyssal Decay on the enemy, we hit them once, and then the Echo puts a new one on, and then we hit them once, and then the Echo puts a new one on, and we hit them once. If you spec Abyssal Echoes in a different way, sometimes I see people coming down all the way down here because it looks really good. It looks like enemies take 8% increased damage, times 3 is 24. Enemies take increased damage is pretty good. You really, really do not need this in our build. So if we come down here, it says it's no longer consumed when the enemy is hit, which means that we can't get extra damage by hitting the enemy in between each echo. And then if you take a node like this, which looks really good, this would mean that we need to have 6 seconds plus increased duration. It's like 8 seconds or so. This would mean that we need to hit the enemy 4 times every second for the entire duration of 8 seconds in order to have the same damage as what we otherwise get over here, which is just a lot of effort for not much gained. So the 3 fluff points, I guess we actually have 4 fluff points here. So we use 16 points really well, and we don't use other points particularly well. But we have these points here for extra AoE, which feels pretty good. And then we have 1 point, the 20th point, that doesn't really do much. I've put it down here into Embrace the Darkness. This is actually a bug right now. This says directly using Abyssal Echoes grants you another coating for 4 seconds. Directly using means that you're casting yourself, not triggering off some other skill. So this works, it gives me damage, it's not supposed to. So technically this is a bug. I mentioned this note here. We said enemies take increased damage. Enemies take 24% increased damage. Sounds good, but we have Volatile Reversal. If you don't know how busted Volatile Reversal is, that means that you haven't watched a previous YouTube video where I learned how busted this skill is. So normally you would look at this and you would say enemies take 60% increased damage. That's pretty good. If you play Path of Exile, you know how good that is. And you'd also see this. Enemies take 30% increased damage. So all these enemies take increased damage modifiers are additive with each other, and they're multiplicative altogether with the rest of your damage. So you have 30, 60 is 90. 90 is pretty good. But it turns out it stacks. So if you hit an enemy twice, boom, boom, with both of those Void Rifts there. If you hit an enemy with both of them, then both of them happen. So we have 60 plus 30 is 90, times 2 from both of those rifts is 180. So we already have enemies take 180% increased damage over time. So when I tell you that, we really don't need this crumbling node down here, you gotta believe me. We really don't need this crumbling node down here. Especially because this lasts for 4 seconds, and sometimes you can get enough cooldown recovery by hitting enemies, by killing enemies, by taking advantage of these nodes here, that you can actually get multiple stacks off and have like enemies take 360% increased damage sometimes. Wow, this skill is busted. It also solves all of our mana problems, gives us some movement speed, gives us some cast speed, and these count as hits. And the reason that it's relevant that these count as hits is that when Abyssal Echoes is ticking on an enemy, we need to hit an enemy, and we can hit an enemy not only with our melee attack, but also by walking up to it and kiting backward while the Volatile Reversal of Void Rift hits it. All right, so that's 3 skills that we talked about here. Let's talk about the 4th one. This one's boring. It's really good, but it's boring. The last skill here is maybe the biggest question mark, and this is something that you could play with as well. So Void Knight, to begin with, doesn't really have much in terms of defense. We have damage, and then we also have... Sometimes you can use a Bastion of Honor. I think Bastion of Honor works really, really well on Void Knight builds because it gives you so much defense in a way that you don't normally have any defense at all, right? So here comes Vengeance, right? We have some mana problems, and we can hit enemies, taking advantage of this node here, in order to generate mana, which is really nice. We also have some defensive problems where we don't really have a shield, we have to use a two-handed sword, and our mastery doesn't give us much in terms of defense. But here comes Vengeance, giving us less damage taken and less damage taken over on the bolster node here. So it kind of does everything we need it to do, and it's just a nice thing to include in the build. You could try Warpath, but Warpath means that your mana is not regenerating while you're Warpathing, and then it kind of felt awkward. I tried Void Path for like maybe 10 minutes or so, and I wasn't really enjoying it. A less defensive option could be using Multi-Strike. Multi-Strike would give you better coverage of hitting more enemies, but I didn't really feel like this was doing what I wanted to do. It doesn't give you the same defense of Vengeance, and I think Vengeance is just kind of an elegant solution to fit into this build. It feels really good having that layer of defense. So this is how we spec'd it up. Basically, just grabbing Zealot's Technique, Bolster, and then some extra fluff nodes for attack speed and whatever this does. I hardly read it. So, in terms of defense, you'll also see that we're wearing a Titan's Heart. Mine is legendary, and it's garbage. I'm really disappointed by how this turned out. But just a normal Titan's Heart, I think, is almost best in slot for this build. So, before I slapped on my Ravenous Void, I was using just a normal pair of gloves like this, and I leveled all the way to level 100 in hardcore playing this build, and this was my gear. I had a normal Titan's Heart without any legendary stats on it, and this felt much better than the rare options, the exalted options that I had instead. Having access to a less damage taken modifier while wielding a two-handed sword felt excellent. I really recommend this to you as well. Having some kind of legendary option would be great. Hopefully yours turns out better than mine. So I got all the way to 100, and then I put on my Ravenous Void because I wanted to make a point. You don't need Ravenous Void to have defense, but having something like Titan's Heart feels very, very good when you don't have any other source of less damage taken. So that's the skills. We just talked about that here. We talked a little bit about defense. Let's talk about the passive skill tree here. This is some normal looking stuff in the base skill tree. Nothing is surprising here. I have 1 point put into Blade Master for some extra attack and cast speed because it feels nice to have some extra attack speed while I'm smacking things with Vengeance like this. So this point's fluff, but the rest of this is pretty standard looking. Remember that Valiant Charge gives movement speed, cooldown, recovery speed, or movement skill, cooldown, recovery speed. This does apply to Lunge, and it also applies to Void Cleave. So that point's great there. In Paladin, we got 15 points. Speccing these pretty much however you want down the middle. Some extra elemental resistance, some extra health, some extra endurance. Speccing as you please in order to just, cap your Res or cap your endurance if you need it in order to get sigils. So again, it's a little boring, it's a little stock standard, but it's everything that we need here. Void Knight is almost the most interesting part here. You would expect to see a bunch of points up here for all of our Echo Chants. And our Echo Chants really doesn't do much at all, because we're a damage over time build, we're not hit based, we don't need to Void Cleave twice in a row, it doesn't do anything for us. Technically, it puts 2 extra shreds of Void Resistance shred on the enemy. It's not necessary. We don't need any Echo Chants. So what do we need? Well, we can spec all of our points into these flat damage nodes for Spell Void. We can grab a bunch of health. We can grab some Void damage leeches health. This does work on damage over time because this does not have the word hit in it, which is great. Up here, some melee kill threshold is some nice points to help get us toward the right side of our mastery here. Vitality, some vitality and percent life to get us nice and thick. Movement speed, percent increased void damage, and a 1-pointer up here in Void Flux. So that's what we have going on here. You'll see I also have 6 points down here. I would say these are probably your last 6 points in the entire skill tree. let's talk about gear for just a moment as well. Even if you didn't have a legendary Dreamthorn, even if you didn't have 265% increased damage over time, doesn't matter. Dreamthorn is still excellent for this build, and it's still the kind of thing that you'd want. In terms of unique options or things that you would be looking out for to have LP on them, you would want a Dreamthorn or maybe an Alluvion. Alluvion has some adaptive spell damage. It's that sword that has the tidal wave that shoots out. That's a pretty good option as well for scaling damage in this build. For your helmet, you're wanting vitality and percent health. The rest of this is up to you. The prefix could be anything that has void damage. It could be something that has maybe void damage over time. It could be spell void damage along with flat void damage. That prefix is very strong for this build as well. But some kind of damage modifier for your prefix along with vitality. And then percent health, and then maybe crit avoid or poison res or whatever your other suffix is going to be. For your amulet, you're looking for void damage and damage over time. Those are the two most important things to have for your prefixes. And the suffixes, you could have frailty on hit. That would be a great source of defense. We don't hit that often, so if you don't have frailty on your gear, it's not that big a deal. Yeah, you'd like to have it, but we just don't hit that often. So having a low chance of frailty on hit is really good for a build like Devouring Orb, because Devouring Orb hits a lot. But for us, maybe we're hitting 1 time a second, and we're really not hitting very often. So having a low percent chance to apply frailty on hit or to apply chill on hit for a weapon or something, not having that is not that big a deal. Titan Heart, I think, is your best in slot body armor. Obviously, you'd want some kind of legendary with like maybe void damage, vitality, percent health, something along those lines. Your belt is going to be pretty stock standard. Your suffixes on your belt should pretty much always be the same. Should be percent health and hybrid health, just because those modifiers are so impactful. And then cleanse should be one of the prefixes, and your other prefix is flexible. You can go for void damage, damage over time, or a little bit of mana regeneration. Whatever belt you have sitting around should be just fine. For our rings, we'd like to have vitality-based rings. We'd like to have coral rings, because vitality gives us flat damage, a little bit of percent damage, and it also just makes us nice and girthy. 3,500 life with just some normal-looking gear here. I always feel like when I'm gearing up these Void Knight characters, I feel like I get so much vitality and so much percent life and hybrid life. I really don't mind getting rings that look like this that don't have any health as a suffix. For your gloves, obviously Ravenous Void or Busted, but for you, you might be looking for something like this. Damage over time or strength are both great prefixes. Percent increased melee attack speed would be nice as well, because having a little bit of attack speed feels good just for quality of life. Your suffixes should always be hybrid life, and then whatever else you need. You need crit avoid, resistance, frailty on hit, something along those lines there. For your boots, vitality, health, movement speed. And then for our relic, this is our place to get +2 Void Cleave. You should have 22 levels on Void Cleave. So you want at least +2. If you could get +3, that would be even better, but something along these lines. All right, so for the relics, every once in a while, we still get to Echo. So we only have a 10% Echo chance from our base mastery down here. 10% chance to be repeated by an Echo 0.5 seconds later. So having something like this, 38% increased void damage when its skill echoes is still good. So it's 75% damage most of the time, and then like 100% increased damage or 110% increased damage sometimes beyond that. So this is a pretty good place to be. Something like this. We'd like to have inspiration somewhere. Remember, inspiration, if you hold down Alt or Control Alt, I guess it's just Alt here. Inspiration's a 4-second buff. It gives you cooldown recovery speed, and then cooldown recovery speed helps you pop off with more volatile reversals, more void cleaves, more lunges, just more of the stuff that you like doing anyways. So having one inspiration idol somewhere feels great. Honestly, as you're gearing this character up, if all of your idols are just vitality void res, vitality poison res, vitality fizz res, you're already doing very well. Just because vitality, it scales your offense and it scales your defense. What more could you ask for? So that about wraps up the character. And like I said before, the fact that this character got bug fixed, and now that Void Cleave resets the existing duration on your existing Ravaging aura, it feels great. It would be a crime if there weren't some kind of reference point or YouTube video or reference material out there for people who wanted to build this character and experiment with this character. Hopefully you like characters like this as much as I do. I love Void Knights, my favorite class. I love damage over time. This kind of stuff is exactly what I'd like to play. If you have questions about this, you can always leave them in the description of this YouTube video, or you can drop by Twitch live at twitch.tv/ParryThePig, where I'll be happy to answer any questions you have for builds like this or builds for other stuff as well. So thanks for being here. Appreciate it. I'll see you next time.